Ms. Lear, why don't we start?
Okay. Hello, my name is Wolfgang Ryer, and we're here greeting Dr. Kang. He's from URP, and he's going to be talking to us. I'll just read his topic and his bio, and then give it over to Dr. Kang. Dr. Kang is an assistant professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Florida. As an interdisciplinary social scientist, his research interests encompass affordable housing policies, housing stability and residential mobility, urban poverty, and social equity. His primary research goal is to utilize his extensive knowledge and skills accumulated in the urban and regional planning discipline, A, to identify the barriers that constrain low-income households' options for affordable and stable housing, and B, to develop policies and plans to preserve and expand their housing options. His core interests can be encapsulated in a few basic questions. Under what city, neighborhood, and household level conditions are affordable housing options for low-income households constrained or expanded? What can policies and planning do to create environments in which affordable and stable housing options are available for them? Why do existing housing programs and planning efforts still fail to meet their housing needs? Once low-income households achieve housing stability, do such stable housing conditions contribute to alleviating poverty and promoting upward social mobility from the long-term perspective? These questions get to the heart of ongoing discussions about housing poverty and various policy and planning efforts to preserve and expand affordable housing. In addition to today's presentation, Dr. Kang recently conducted research on the understanding conditions for chronic forms of housing instability and its cumulative impact on mental health. After he joined the DCP faculty, his research interest has extended to the focus on social vulnerability and equitable distribution of housing assistance funds. He teaches survey of planning information systems, housing, public policy, and planning, urban planning project, and planning theory and history. Prior to joining the faculty at the University of Florida, he earned his PhD in city and regional planning from The Ohio State University. He holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in urban planning and engineering from Yonsei University, Seoul, South Korea, and I will give it to Dr. Kang.
Thank you for the instructions. So let me quickly share my presentation file. So good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure to have this opportunity to introduce my recent research. So today I would like to introduce one study that I have recently done. This study is about naturally occurring affordable housing. So I will introduce this concept in detail in a few minutes, but it basically means a privately owned, affordably priced rental housing unit without any public subsidies. So as it says, it is affordable housing that naturally occurred in the private market. So that's the kind of main subject that I want to discuss today. But before jumping to my main study, let me just briefly introduce some basic context around this topic. So I would like to start my story with introducing some kind of numbers that shows the severe affordability crisis in the rental housing market in the United States. So according to the 2018 American Community Survey, approximately 47% of all renters in the United States are housing cost burden. That means they are paying more than 30% of household income for housing cost. And also, approximately 1 in every 4 renters, all renters in the United States are severely housing cost burden. That means they are paying more than half of their income for housing cost. And with this high prevalence of housing cost burden among renters, one concerning trend is that many people tend to think like this affordability issues is just happening to the lowest income kind of subpopulations. But when you look at the national trend, when you look at this figure, not surprisingly, the lowest income group are suffering from the severe housing cost burden, paying a large portion of their income for housing cost, but also, as you can see, these red arrows, this housing cost burden is getting prevalent in relatively moderate income groups as well. So that's the one kind of context that I want to share before I jump into the main subject. And the other thing is that despite this tight market environments where like large share of renters are suffering from high housing cost burden, uh, the housing assistance to support those groups is relatively limited. So first of all, housing assistance is not an entitlement in the United States. That means even if you are qualified to apply for those housing programs, it does not mean that you are guaranteed to get those subsidies. So actually, only 1 in every 4 income eligible households are receiving any type of housing assistance from the federal governments, from the state governments or local governments, and the rest of them, the 75% of income eligible people, just have to fend for themselves in the private market. So as you can easily guess, when you look at the most metropolitan areas, they have really long waiting list of people who are eager to get the housing assistance. So they usually wait at least 3 to 5 years to get the subsidies, or some areas, those waiting lists are just frozen. So they just have to wait like more than 10 years and so on. And also from the very long-term perspective, the federal fund has declined over time, and this current administration is not an exception. So basically, the general source for housing assistance have been substantially limited. And the other thing that I want to talk about is when you think about the role of living in affordable and stable housing in our lives, numerous studies highlight some detrimental impacts of living in unaffordable housing or living in a precarious housing situation on our lives. For example, if you spend too much money for your housing, then they may not have sufficient resources for other basic necessities, including like health insurance, healthy food, or some kind of the car ownership to access the job. And also, if they are paying too much money for their housing, then their housing situation have to be really vulnerable to any kind of minor financial shocks, such as unexpected medical costs. And we are seeing this kind of situation during this pandemic era. And once they lost their job, they basically have no money to pay their next month's rents. So the federal government's declared the eviction moratorium, so they are being excused. But once those kind of intervention is lifted, then we may have to see a wave of evictions in the following years. And I'm not going to talk about detailed things here, but if they cannot maintain their residence, they have to leave, then that kind of displacement experience is also really harmful on many dimensions of their lives. It's bad for their health, bad for their social relationship, bad for kids' educational environments, and so on. Then let me introduce the research that I want to present today. So as I mentioned, my study is about naturally occurring affordable housing, so widely called NOAH. Then what is NOAH? So it is usually referred to unsubsidized, privately owned affordable rental units. So they are affordable in the first place, so that they are not fancy luxury apartment units. They are likely to be older buildings, mostly built in the second half of 20th centuries. They tend to have a fewer amenities, and they tend to be relatively deteriorated conditions. So these are the kind of examples of NOAH. So these are the apartment complex supported by like preservation kind of policies in Minnesota and Illinois. And so basically they are naturally occurred in the private market. So new units get aged and deteriorated, their rent prices get affordable to the relatively lower income groups. And unfortunately, this term started to be used recently, so there is no universally accepted definition. So some people highlight the NOAA's rent prices, whereas some people focus on the combination of rent and qualities. But in my study, I focus on their rent prices. So in my study, the definition of NOAA is the rent units affordable to low income or very low income household without any housing subsidies. Then why does NOAA matter? So why does looking at a NOAA matters? So well, when you look at the rental housing market, many people think affordable housing units are based on the public subsidies, but according to one report, more than 80% of total affordable rental units were NOAA over the last several decades. So this is I think the most important kind of source of affordable housing in general. And the other thing is many NOAA units have to be exposed to some other factors that may work to reduce the NOAA units in the market. So NOAA units are relatively cheap, and maybe those units are located in the good kind of places. So they can be easily targeted by developers and can be replaced with more the rental units for higher groups through the redevelopments, through the renovations. Or sometimes landlords think they don't have any incentives to maintain their properties at such affordable prices. So they just simply abandon their properties, or those properties may be just demolished. So as you can see in this kind of diagram, let's say we have 10 NOAA units, but some of them may be replaced with a luxurious new renovated apartment, or some units just disappeared because of the neglect of a landlord, or they may be inhabitable because of the poor maintenance. And when you look at the national trend, you will see that this concern about disappearing the NOAA unit seems to be largely true. So when you look at the national trend, we are seeing this dramatic decline in low-cost rental units. So one recent report between the 2012 and 2017, the number of units renting for under $600 declined by 3.1 million nationally. So this is the trend. So when you look at the low number of low-cost units, when you look at the share, you are seeing the stark decline over time. So one big planning question that I have an interest in is what planners and policymakers can do to leverage existing naturally occurring affordable rental housing to preserve or expand housing options for low-income households. So this is the one kind of question that I start to have an interest once I joined the UF faculty last year. And I just started to look at the literatures, and I realized that there are several gaps around the discussion of NOAA. So the first thing is, in housing field, a lot of studies have heavily focused on subsidized housing units, especially the units that are close to the expirations of contract with the private landlord. So how we can continue to make those subsidized units kind of affordable after the contracts are expired with the landlord. But housing scholars relatively pay less attention to the NOAA units in the private market. And also, from a planning perspective, it might be a first step to understand exactly how many NOAA units we have and how those units changed, so that we can kind of figure out the ways to distribute our resources to preserve those units, or make a plan to understand why some areas those units are disappearing. But unfortunately, NOAA units exist in the private market, so there are few available data sets of NOAA in the first place. And some studies try to measure the NOAA, but those indicators seems to be really overly simplified. For example, one study just used the indicators that if the rent is below the $750, then it's going to be affordable units. But given all the variations in living cost and housing cost across different states or different municipalities in the United States, this single price-based approach may result in some kind of misleading outcomes. Or some studies just simply focus on relatively kind of large apartment complex managed by private property management firms, or they just focus on a particular type of rental units. So basically, they cannot show us some kind of big picture of NOAA market that we are having in the local housing, local municipalities. And also, there are a few studies who start to focus on quantifying the NOAA units, but their focus is more on estimating the gaps on the regional or national scales. So those kind of approach may not fully take into account the neighborhood level kind of context where the NOAA units are generated or reduced. And some studies just don't carefully distinguish the subsidized unit from the unsubsidized units. They just simply assume that affordably priced rental units are all unsubsidized units or vice versa. So in this study, what I did is I proposed a unique way to estimate the number of NOAA units at a neighborhood level, in this study, the census tract level, by using several secondary data sources. And here, the NOAA is defined as a rental units affordable to two income groups. The one is the household with the 50% of HAMFI, and the second group is the household with the income below the 80% of HAMFI. I'm not going to talk about this in details, but you can just consider it as a percentage of area median income. So for example, in Gainesville, area median income is $71,000 around for four-person household. That means 80% of area median income is about $56,000, and 50% of area income is $35,500. So in Gainesville, the very low income, according to this definition, is a household with the $35,500 or below. I think this kind of relative measure is useful because it takes into account the different kind of living costs and housing costs across the spaces. So hereafter, I'm going to call the very low income household, the 50% of area median income, and 80% I call it the low income household to kind of avoid any kind of confusion. And the second thing is, based on the proposed approach, we examine the neighborhood level changes in NOAA units based on the four largest metropolitan areas, including Miami, Orlando, Tampa, and Jacksonville. And our study period is from 2000 to 2016. Especially when we investigate the changes in NOAA, our focus is more on exactly what type of neighborhood the NOAA units are likely to generate it or reduced during this period. And also, we wanted to kind of see this pattern in the context of suburbanization. So we wanted to see whether those NOAA units are more likely to be generated in the suburban communities. So some of you may wonder why you focus on this kind of suburban context. So one kind of big change we experienced after the financial crisis is that the large portion of rental stock at the national level is single family homes. And as you already know, the single family house is a typical type of residence that we can find in the suburban communities. And so those kind of many suburban communities are getting open to the rental units. That's the supply side of the rental market. And when you look at the movements of people, especially the movements of relatively low-income people, then many reports start to point out that many low-income people start to move to suburban communities. And so the binary distinction between urban poor and rich suburban community is getting vague. So many relatively affluent people start to live in a downtown area, whereas many low-income people start to move to the suburban communities. So we thought this suburban context is really a useful way to understand the general landscape of NOAA as a first step. So we just wanted to see whether those NOAA units are more likely to generated in the suburban communities. So let me briefly explain what I did. So the first step, and I think the most important part, is to estimate the number of NOAA units at the neighborhood level, at the census tract level. And there are so many detailed things, but I just want to explain this in a really simple way. So first, I use the secondary data to estimate the number of rental units affordable to low income or the very low income people in a certain census tract at a certain time. And I think this number itself is interesting, but it has some limitation. The biggest limitation is it includes both subsidized and unsubsidized units. So it is really hard to tell that all those units are NOAA. So what I did is I also estimate the number of subsidized units that existed in a certain census tract at a certain time. And the remaining part is just simple math. I just subtract the total number of rental units affordably priced for low-income people, and I estimate the number of subsidized units for those income group, and then subtract that number from the total number. Then the remaining part of this equation would be the NOAA. So let me just quickly talk about this first part of my equation. So I used the comprehensive housing affordability strategy data. So it's so-called CHAS. And this CHAS data is developed by the Department of Housing and Urban Development and American Community Survey microdata. And in this data, being an affordable unit means the tenants spend no more than 30% of their income on housing cost. So when we try to figure out whether a particular unit is affordable to the low income or very low income, is totally depends on whether that particular housing unit would be affordable to generic or hypothetical household with income at the very low or the low threshold of interest. And one kind of big advantage of using CHAS data is that basically it provides some adjusted numbers in order to take into account some kind of mismatch between the household size and the unit size. So for example, in the following slide, I'm going to see you some examples, but if I am a member of 4-person household, and we can affordably live in a studio house. That's possible, but it can be viewed as overcrowded because the house size is much smaller than my household size. It's a common kind of misalignment between those two. So in that case, it is really hard to say that those studio can work as affordable housing units for 4-person household. And in practically speaking, in private market, many landlords don't allow to live such a large number of people in such a small space. So basically those studio options are not available for 4-person household. So here's one example how we can figure out whether a certain unit is affordable or not. So let's say we have one 4-person household. The annual income is 48,000, so 4,000 per month. So being affordable housing means the unit with a monthly rent of 1,200 or below. So basically 30% of household income. And as I mentioned, this is the kind of rent price threshold I can use, but I cannot apply this rule to all existing rental units. I need to take into account the size of those units because of the size of household, in this case, 4-person household. So in order to adjust this mismatch between the household and the unit size, this data basically allow us to kind of modify the income threshold a little bit based on the number of household. So I'm not going to talk about the detailed things, but let's say if we have like 2-bedroom apartment, which is not sufficient for 4-person household according to the overcrowding criteria of the HUD. So in that case, this 4-person income threshold is adjusted so that the household income is also adjusted accordingly, and the rent of affordable housing is slightly lower than what we got here. So this 2-bedroom apartment is suitable for 3-person household, not 4-person household, so that the rent price threshold for figuring out whether that unit is affordable or not should be lower than $1,200. I know it's complicated, but my point here is that one good advantage of using this data is to take into account that kind of like mismatch between the household and the housing size so that we can kind of get more accurate numbers of the affordably priced rental units in a certain neighborhood. So what kind of information we can get from that data? First, we can get the number of very low income or the low income household in a certain neighborhood in a particular year. And the second thing is the number of rental units affordable to either a very low income or the low income household in a particular year in a certain neighborhood. So for example, this is aggregate number, but let's say I'm talking about Pinellas County, which is close to the city of Tampa, and based on 2016, so in total, like there are like 147,000 rental units covering about like 250 census tracts. Then in total, in this county, there are about 97,000 units affordable to low-income household, and we have about 80,000 household, renter household in that income bracket. So we can see that there are some remaining affordable units in the market. And in case of the very low income people, in terms of rent prices, there are 23,000 kind of units affordable to very low income household, but the number of very low income renters are 50,000. So we have about 27,000 unit gaps in this county. So this is the kind of the information we can get from this CHAS data. So now we have some numbers for this very first part of my equation. So we know like how many units are affordably priced for low income or very low income people. And at the census tract level, in case of Pinellas County, about like 400 units are affordable. And of course, some census tracts have no affordable housing at all. So their affordable housing unit is 0. But in some cases, some census tracts have a lot of affordable housing units in their community and so on. But as I mentioned, these numbers include both subsidized and unsubsidized units. So it is just hard to tell that these units can be viewed as NOAA. So the next step is I need to estimate the number of subsidized units in a certain neighborhood at a certain time. So I'm not going to talk about detailed things, but there are so many federal, state, and local housing programs, and they are targeting the very low income or low income people and taking into account different kind of income criteria for different programs. Basically, I estimated the number of subsidized units in a certain neighborhood at a certain time. So I'm not going to talk about detailed things here. So I got the numbers, for example, in Pinellas County in 2016, in total, there are 9,000 subsidized units. And at the census tract level, on average, each census tract has 36, 37 units. And not surprisingly, some census tracts have no subsidized units at all. And some census tracts have like relatively large number of subsidized units. And the remaining part is just simple math. At the census tract level, I just subtract this number from this number. So the remaining part would be the NOAA units in my approach. So what kind of information that we can get from using that approach? So first of all, we can see the distribution of NOAA at the census tract level cross-sectionally. This is the map that I made for Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. And as you can see that, like we can just see how the NOAA units are spatially distributed over time. And this map is based on 2016. And also I measured the NOAA units at 4 different time periods, 2000, 2009, 2010, and 2016. So basically it allowed me to capture the trend of the NOAA. In other words, the changes in NOAA units at the census tract level. So this is the Tampa metropolitan area. And this map basically shows how the NOAA stock changed between 2000 and 2009 and between 2010 and 2016. So I'm just showing this map because I just want you to understand like what kind of information we can get from this this estimation method. And so I wanted to examine like in what type of neighborhood NOAA units are generated or reduced. Especially I wanted to check the pattern in the context of suburbanization. So I basically categorized the census tract into 8 groups. As you can see that, I just used the suburban typology developed by the Moose and Mendes. So category 1 basically shows the most urban neighborhood in terms of ways that residents live. And that urbanism is basically measured based on car commuting, homeownership, and single family housing shares. And the category 8 is the most suburban communities. In other words, the residents living in those neighborhoods tend to have much more suburban style, suburban ways to live. And I just wanted to see how NOAA units are distributed across this 8 neighborhood and how NOAA unit changed over time in each type of neighborhood. And I'm not going to talk about detailed things about regression models, but I just wanted to see how robust those descriptive findings are. So I wanted to see whether those patterns are still valid even after I control for other conditions. So my regression approach is basically based on some first difference models. So the regression model is designed to explain the tract level changes in NOAA units between 2000 and 2009 or between 2010 and 2016. Some of you may wonder why there is a gap between 2009 and 2010. So around the census 2010, the boundary of census tract changed. So it was kind of impossible to connect these two periods. And the suburban variables from category 1, the most urban neighborhood to the most suburban neighborhood, is included as a form of dummy variable. And also I include a set of control variables in the form of static and change variables. The control variables are selected based on some literature review on potential factors that may affect the changes in NOAA units. So I control the population, employment density, racial composition, or vacancy rate, new housing developments, changes in housing value, rent, median income, and so on. And also, I'm kind of dealing with the spatial data. So the changes in NOAA unit in a certain area may be influenced by the changes in NOAA units in surrounding areas. So there could be some potential spatial autocorrelation problems. So in order to take into account that, I also used the spatial lag model. And let me quickly introduce what I found. I know there are a lot of numbers, and I guess many of you are looking at election results. So you may be well trained temporarily to read and interpret some complicated kind of numbers. But let's start to look at the total side here. So in 2000, in 4 largest metropolitan area in Florida, we had 1,300,000 rental units in total. Among them, 20% is the NOAA for very low-income people, and 64% is the NOAA unit for low-income people. And the numbers in the parentheses basically show the gap between the number of NOAA units and number of low-income or very low-income people. And the negative number basically means the number of people in that income bracket is larger than NOAA units. In other words, we lack NOAA units. And the positive number, the blue colored numbers, means we have some remaining NOAA units compared to the number of people in that income bracket. So in this case, as I mentioned, in 2000, we already had some kind of shortage of NOAA in the very low income groups. So we about like 180,000 units lacked for the very low income household, but we have some remaining NOAA units for low income household. And when we look at the 2016, the most recent year, as you can see that in total, a lot of rental units are added to the rental housing market. About like 500,000 units are added. But surprisingly, when you look at the number of NOAA for very low income people, the number actually declined and the gap was widened. And the share of NOAA for very low income only covers 13% of total rental units. And in case of NOAA for low income household, the number is slightly increased, but as we saw, the number of renters dramatically increased in those 4 metropolitan areas. So now we are seeing some kind of gaps of NOAA or shortage of NOAA in those areas. And the share of NOAA also declined to the 55%. So that's the just big picture of how the NOAA unit kind of changed in 4 metropolitan area. And also we found some regional variations in patterns. For example, in case of Miami, which is one of the least affordable housing market, not in the state, not in the country, even in the world. So in 2000, we already saw the severe shortage of NOAA for low-income people or for very low-income people, and those numbers even larger in 2016. But in case of Tampa, in 2000, they were kind of in the good situation. They have some remaining NOAA units for very low income people, and they had a lot of remaining NOAA units for low income people. But it turns out in 2016, they start to see some kind of shortage of NOAA for very low income people. And also you can see that the remaining NOAA units start to disappear. Then let's look at this kind of NOAA changes across the different types of neighborhoods. I know there are a lot of numbers, but let's start to look at this part. So the category 1 means the most urban neighborhoods. So as you can see that in 2000, so this table is for period between 2000 and 2009. In 2000, there were about 83,000 NOAA units in category 1 neighborhoods. And when you look at this total, so basically it covers 1/3 of the total NOAA units in 4 metropolitan areas. So I think this neighborhood is still the kind of main type of neighborhood with a lot of NOAA units. But as you can see that during this period, we are seeing the dramatic decline in the NOAA units in this type of neighborhood. Whereas when you look at the most suburban type of neighborhood, we are seeing a slight increase in the NOAA units. And when you look at the NOAA for a low-income household, you are seeing kind of similar patterns. In the most urban areas, the NOAA units start to decline during this period, but relatively suburban neighborhoods, you can see some kind of increases in the NOAA units during this period. When you look at the period after 2010, NOAA unit increased across all types of neighborhoods. But as we saw that the gap is widening largely because those 4 metropolitan areas start to have much more rental household in general. So the pace of newly generated NOAA units is much slower than the pace of increase in the rental household in general. And when you look at when you look at like which neighborhood the NOAA units are more generated in this period, so category 1 neighbors still have a lot of NOAA units, still 1/3 of total NOAA stock. But when you look at the pace of increase compared to suburban communities, the amount of increase is much smaller than what we can find in the suburban communities. And same for the NOAA for low-income household. So, and also when I just include all the control variables in my regression analysis, still there is a significant kind of difference in the NOAA changes between the most urban areas and most suburban areas. So let me quickly summarize what I found in this study. So in all 4 metropolitan areas, we found the widening gap between the numbers of NOAA units and the low-income renter household. That's the kind of big picture on a regional scale. And when I look at the distribution of NOAA across the different types of neighborhood, many NOAA units are still located in the most urban neighborhoods. But the newly generated NOAA units are disproportionately located in suburban neighborhoods. So that means after the financial crisis, the 10-year transition from owner-occupied units to the rental units worked as a primary source of NOAA supply, similar to what happened in the general rental housing market. And I didn't have a chance to talk about the result related to control variables. One interesting finding is that more NOAA units are generated in the neighborhood with many African American and Hispanic people. So it means after the financial crisis, those ownership-based units tend to be transitioned to rental units disproportionately in those communities. And also we had a kind of interest in looking at the effects of new housing construction and see whether there's any filtering effects. So filtering means once new fancy apartments are built, then relatively higher income move to those new units so that the units that those affluent people previously lived become available to relatively lower group, and all those kind of units are filtered down to the lowest segment of rental market so that low-income people may have some additional options because of the new residential developments that happened at the top of the rental market. But we couldn't find any robust evidence suggesting the existence of filtering effects. Actually, what we found is the opposite. So new housing units were built, NOAA units tend to decline, not increase, even though the size itself is not that large. So conclusion. So when I just complete my analysis, interpret my finding, I usually ask two questions to myself. The first thing is, what does it mean for knowledge? So I think the biggest contribution of this study to our knowledge is that it shows the general landscape of NOAA from the supply side of the market by using really sophisticated estimation method. So some of you may wonder whether that's a good sign or the bad sign. One thing that I want to highlight here is that we are seeing suburbanization of NOAA that co-occur with growing shortage of affordable rental units. So we need more affordable housing units in general. And also we are seeing that those units are spatially dispersed. And one key remaining question in addition to my finding is that whether low-income renters are actually able to find and continue to live in those suburban NOAA units. And my study does not tell any story about that. So some people may see this as a good sign. So maybe unexpected expansion of their neighborhood options, maybe way to reduce the concentration of poverty and giving them a better opportunities to make them live in a suburban communities. I think based on some kind of common assumption that the suburban communities have a relatively better opportunities, especially in terms of safety and the freedom from the crime. But as I mentioned, one remaining kind of, before we jump into that early conclusion, one kind of linkage that need to be verified is that whether they have any extra barriers to move to those suburban NOAA units that can be related to the job or any kind of social services that tend to be concentrated in the urban areas, in most metropolitan areas, or some kind of coverage of public transportation system in that areas. And the flip side of this story is that we are seeing great loss of NOAA in urban neighborhoods. So we should keep in mind that there is a strong gentrification pressure in urban neighborhoods, and those kind of redevelopment efforts may work to reduce the NOAA units. Then what does it mean for practice? So I think the biggest contribution to practitioner is we propose a new method to estimate the NOAA units and its change over time. So this approach can directly benefit local municipalities in Florida because it can be easily replicable based on the publicly available data set. And this estimation is largely based on American Community Survey and CHAS. So as they release the up-to-date data sets, the municipality can also update their NOAA-related estimates. And also, even outside of the Florida, this method can provide some insights to anyone who wants to quantify the NOAA units on a smaller geographical scale, because they can also use they can use this approach in a similar way based on their local data or based on some national-wide data sets that are available out there. So next story would be, first, I want to see exactly who is living in those suburban NOAA units and whether those units are actually available to the low-income people. So maybe those suburban NOAA units are being occupied by higher income groups, so may not be available to them in the first place, or what kind of condition they need to meet in order to find or in order to continue to reside in those suburban kind of neighborhoods. And the other thing is, this is a massive data set. And the main point of my presentation is to advertise the availability of this data set. And I think this data set itself has a really great potential for collaborative research. So one thing that I'm doing is working with a professor in the tourism and hospitality department. And what we are looking at is the relationship between the housing market and Airbnb activities. So what we want to do is like which income groups or which housing submarkets are impacted the most by the growing Airbnb listing units in Miami areas. We can see, but there are so many other potential pathways. For example, if you want to see whether the expansion of universities in the college town affect the changes in NOAA, we can do that. Or growing kind of tourism activities affect the changes in NOAA in nearby neighborhoods, something like that. So I know I spent too much time for that, but I just want to conclude my presentation with a few notes. The first thing is this presentation is part of the collaborative work with Dr. Jae Jung, who is a member of housing displacement projects at the UC Berkeley, and he's currently working for the real estate department at Konkuk University as an assistant professor. And this study is currently under review for publication. So if you want to take a look at full manuscript, I'll be happy to share that. And also, I would like to express my special thanks to Anne, Deb, Bill, and the Schimberg Center. They gave us a really great knowledge and technical kind of assistance to estimate the number of subsidized units at the census tract level in Florida. So without their help, this study won't be able to kind of be finalized. So thank you. So that's pretty much what I prepared. This is the reference. And I just left my email address. So if you have any questions or any follow-up, then feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kang. And I'd like to apologize to Ann, Nasser, and Bill because for their problems they had getting in. We were hacked last week and there was an attempt this week. So it's not an excuse, but that was the situation regarding that. I'm going to give it over now to Dr. Kang for questions. Well, I can certainly go if no one else wants to. My main issue that when I was watching you go through the election numbers, quote unquote, is that it was a strong interest to me of gentrification and then kind of a satellite city effect that maybe the people who couldn't get the housing within their own neighborhood or region or locality would have to come out to a satellite city, work in a mall, and get whatever they could get. And some of them were getting those units, but it was pretty much more of a negative effect. Do you think that would be an interest?
Yes, so in this study, the changes in NOAA have basically two different directions. Either it's going up or it's going down. But I think it will be really interesting to see the urban areas separately from the suburban areas. So which area is actually declining in terms of NOAA numbers and which area is actually increasing. So we can kind of separate the discussion about gentrification from the suburbanization of NOAA. So in current study, all those stories are basically combined in the findings. So yes, I mean, back to your point, gentrification is the big piece of puzzle in this entire picture, even though it was not a main point or main focus of this study.
Thank you. And Anne, I think, has her hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Seungbeom. This is really interesting, and want to invite you over to do a special Schimberg Center version of this presentation with our full staff, because I think they'd find it really helpful. I had a question. I was interested in what you said about the increase in NOAA units in suburban areas, and how that might have to do with the flipping of properties from owner to rental following the foreclosure crisis, which I've always assumed was happening. Did you look at all, when you were looking at unit size, did you see that more of the new units that were NOAA were larger? Because I can see there still being a mismatch where you have more affordable 3-4 bedroom houses, but you still have a lot of 1-2 person households in need.
That's a good question. And unfortunately, in this study, we didn't take a look at the size of the NOAA units or types of the NOAA units. That can be definitely a part of the next steps, like whether those NOAA units are single family units or duplex or like the multifamily units. But in this study, no, just the raw number of NOAA units that exist in a certain neighborhood.
Yeah, because the increase in the number of units is, I think, one of the most interesting and sort of counterintuitive things you put forward. So would love to look into that more with you.
Sure.
We still have 3 minutes if anybody wants to get a question in, either by unmuting or chat.
Kang, this is Vince. So I have a very impressive, and thank you for the presentation. I guess I was just wondering if you had any chance looking at, for instance, the proprietary Zillow data, because I think the one caveat of using chats is the date, right? It's like the most recent data set is 2016. Mm-hmm. Wonder if you had a chance to look using like potentially Zillow data to kind of aggregate to the same level and basically make a comparison. One thing to make a comparison to see how accurate we use the census data, but essentially the survey. To make a comparison, understanding the robustness of the data, and secondly, I think from a local perspective, you talk about the practices. I think local government will be extremely interested in looking at the NOAA data, but wonder if we use a more recent data set to look at what the current trends will be actually more useful for local practice.
And thank you, Vince. I mean that's a really great point. And just correct me if I'm wrong, but so our team also has interest in Zillow data, and we had access to it. But the smaller geographical kind of level available in the Zillow data was zip code, not the census tract level. So in order to go with the Zillow data, we had to kind of aggregate all those kind of other control variables or other factors at the zip code level, which may cause some kind of errors in our estimation process. But I'm not 100% sure that Zillow data provide the numbers or information at a smaller geographical scale.
Well, I'm happy to contact more about this later after this call, but my understanding that the real estate department at UF has Zillow data actually down to property level. And you have, but I think there's there's a certain use you can actually use that. And I work now for a different company here nationally, and I know we work at San Antonio, Texas, and the city actually also have access to the Zillow property level data. And so I did similar analysis in San Antonio, basically kind of estimate NOAA using the similar method, but use Zillow data to do that analysis. So that's why I kind of very impressed and interested in like potentially comparison of your method and using Zillow to look at the difference. And I know there is places I can now remember. I think one of the northern cities in the U.S. which the city government actually has access. They have developed a new database themselves using some data like they have to estimate NOAA. in the city. So I think it would be interesting if you use that chassis and look at that city and make a comparison directly to what they have. It would be interesting to validate your method.
Mhm. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for letting me know the data availability for other kind of the works happening out there. Yes, if so, one limitation of my study is that basically there is no verification process to see whether those numbers are how much those numbers are accurate. So if we can look at the like possible data or property-based information and estimate NOAA numbers from that data and compare those numbers, I think that would be a great study. Thank you.
And unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time, but thank you very much, Dr. Kang. Very interesting. I'm interested to see how that turns out as well. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Sorry for the problems, and we will end the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.